We have a very special guest with us today. Before I get any further, we have the first Deputy Commissioner, Commissioner Benjamin Tucker. I want to thank you for being here.
No, it's my pleasure, Ed. Thank you.
And with him is Joe Crocitto. Joe and I go back about 100 years. So, but Joe came to me with the concept. He said, "I want to do a program, and I think the commissioner will be on board and want to come and join us." And as it turns out, he is. And the name of that program that Joe named was Building Bridges.
You know, I thought it would be a very good idea to have this program. It's a good vehicle to bring the police and the community closer together. And who better than the first Deputy Commissioner of the NYPD to be our first guest on our first program. Commissioner Tucker and I go back, I'm dating myself, into the 70s. We were both on the faculty at the police academy. We were instructors teaching recruits, and that's how I got to know him. And then as time went on, I lost track of him. He was going to law school, and then he was teaching at Pace University, and next thing you know, we had the layoffs. So with the layoffs, people got to lose track of each other. But I was determined to track him down.
Those were nightmare years, the layoffs. So you remember them well.
Yes. Yeah. And I survived the layoffs as he did, because we had prior city service as police trainees. That was a program back in the 60s. And I tracked him down, and I was told he was at Pace University teaching. I called up Pace. They said, no, he's not here anymore. Make a long story short, if you look at his resume, it's very impressive, his accomplishments. He's an attorney, and he's worked in various executive positions for Mayor Koch, Mayor Bloomberg. He was put on leave from the police department, but I think most importantly, he was working for the federal government, and he worked for President Clinton in some high-level positions, as well as working for President Barack Obama. As a matter of fact, the position he held working for President Obama required Senate confirmation, and that gives you an idea of how important that position was. And then eventually, he came back to the department as the Deputy Commissioner of Training. Commissioner Bratton called on him and asked him if he'd come back, and he accepted the position. And he did an excellent job as Deputy Commissioner of Training. And today, he is now the first Deputy Police Commissioner. And I asked him to come here to explain to the people in the community, as well as police officers who may be watching this program, what his role is as First Deputy Police Commissioner. And I've had prior conversations with him, and I'm amazed as to all the things that he's involved in. So much different than when I first come on the job. The First Deputy Commissioner didn't do all this, and he's doing a lot. So I really want the people in the community, as well as police officers who watch this program, to know exactly what he does. And I want to thank you for accepting the invitation to come on this first show. It means a lot to me. It really does.
No, Joe, I appreciate the invitation. I joined the NYPD in November of 1969. That's a long time ago. And so last November 21st, I celebrated, along with Steve Davis, by the way, our 49th anniversary of being sworn in as police trainees. So that was my beginnings, and started out as trainees were people, as Joe referenced, who it was a rank that existed. It was a civilian position, existed for about a decade in the NYPD, and it allowed you to take the exam at 17 and be appointed at 18.
Right.
And for the next 3 years, you would work in some administrative capacity within the department. Most trainees were assigned to the 911 communications as call takers and dispatchers. A number of us were sent to the field commands. So I was, for example, a telephone switchboard operator in the 8-1 precinct. So that was my beginnings, and it was a great way to learn the job and to learn to love the job. Because if you are the TS operator in the 8-1 precinct back in those days, there was a lot going on, and so everything coming into that station house that wasn't walking came through the TS.
Right.
And so that's how I got my indoctrination. That's how I learned the job, and began to move in a slightly after doing that for about 6 months. Became part of a special program that was conceived by Deputy Commissioner Teresa Melchione, where she selected 60 trainees and trained us to be drug prevention specialists, essentially, and mediators in conflict resolution. And so that experience for young people, young guys who were 19 years old, 18, 19 years old, was kind of extraordinary. To pick up where Joe left off in his introduction, I came back to the job in 2014 after having retired from city government in 1991. July 1, 1991, I had been, at that point, the last position I held after leaving the Koch administration when Mayor Koch lost the election. I was chief of operations for the borough president of Manhattan, who was Ruth Messenger, who succeeded David Dinkins when Mr. Dinkins became mayor.
Right.
And so I got my notice that I was eligible to retire in February of '91, and at that time I decided I would retire. My last day would be June 30th of '91, and so I did. And took the summer off, and built decks on my house and things like that. Very therapeutic. And anyhow, so that was for the next 20 plus years, I did most of what you suggested I was involved in, Joe. Lots of different jobs. Researcher, worked for the Justice Department in the Clinton days. Worked for taught at Pace, and worked for Mayor Bloomberg running school safety when he took over the school system for a couple of years. And so it's been a really interesting time. And as a researcher, doing research around pre-adolescents who are at risk of getting involved in drugs and crime, and re-entry around drug-addicted ex-offenders, all of those things were sort of things that you take with you. And so in many ways it informed why I do what I do today as the first deputy in many instances. And so I came back at the request of Commissioner Bratton, as you suggested, and I ran the training bureau as the deputy commissioner for training for my first 9 months, and built a field training program, all designed to really give our new officers the kind of training they needed, which didn't exist. They weren't getting. Brand new graduates from the academy at that time were being sent to the most challenged assignments, the so-called impact zones. Right. And that really wasn't really a good thing to do, because they were being sent to those commands without the requisite experience and without any support through field training and so forth. So Commissioner Bratton concluded that we were going to discontinue that practice. Even as we were building and revising our recruit curriculum, we were also thinking about the field training program, which was my priority thing to get done initially. And so we did that. And we also, at that time, created, and this goes with the building bridges process. One of the things I really thought was important was to think about how we get community engaged in the process of educating our new cops as they go to their new commands. Right. And so we created what we call the Community Partners Program. And that program was essentially just, we recruited for the 12 impact zones. And the reason we did it this way is because when Commissioner Bratton made the decision that we weren't going to send our officers to the impact zones anymore, we were in the middle of, we had a class in the academy at the time. Actually, the class was sworn in the day after I accepted the position in January of 14, and they were about to graduate in June. And so they were scheduled to go, from an operational perspective, to be assigned to the impact zones. So we said we would send them, but that would be the very last class. But we did say that we would send them, but only if we built a training platform, a field training platform, that would support them when they went out.
Right.
So we did that. We met with all the COs of the 12 impact zones, and we had them select their most qualified, senior, experienced officers, and the best that they had to be field training officers. We helped train them gave them additional training, and then we asked the officers, the commanders, to select community members who they thought would be willing to host our officers when they arrived in these commands. And so it worked out really well. We had almost 800 volunteers ultimately, and so that's how that particular when I came back, how we got started with really enhancing the training experience for our new officers. It worked out well. And so, we opened the new academy in January of 2015,
right?
Which was a 32-acre, as you know, a 32-acre lot in College Point, Queens. And the new academy was a game changer for us because it's a building a facility that has smart classrooms, has tactical training space, mock environments. So we can train our officers for the purpose that I thought we needed to do more of, which is more scenario-based training. And so we moved in that direction as well, and the new building helped us accomplish that. And it's been we opened the doors to the first recruit class in January of 15, and it's been pretty much going 365, 24 hours a day. It seems like, with all sorts of training. But the training also is not just our traditional training. We've changed the way in which we instruct. We went back to the three, for example, they'd gone down to having one instructor teach 3 different disciplines, right. Social science, law, and police science. When Joe and I taught there, we team taught those subjects. I taught law, Joe taught police science, I think, and we had another instructor teaching the social sciences in groups. We taught that way, and it was much more effective, I believe. And we could work together to help enhance the ideas, how it all fit together. I mean, it's not linear, right? You want to, if we're teaching 3 different subject matter, subjects, we want those subjects to mesh, and we want the experience of the recruit to understand how they fit together. So we brought that process back, and that's the way we teach now. But we, as I said, enhanced the scenario-based training significantly, because it helps to have, I think, a menu in your head of what are some of the things I might do if I'm on the street. I have to make decisions really quickly. The more you've had some opportunities to really practice real life scenarios and maybe be involved in making decisions when you're not under as much stress, but those scenarios can be stressful nevertheless. That was a better way to go. And so that's really one of the reasons I came back. But also, when I came back, it was pretty clear that Commissioner Bratton was committed to going the next step to really engage the people in the agency. This is part of my, again, rebuilding trust interior inside the department. And so one of the first things he did was, as he's done in the past in other agencies, is to engage with this re-engineering process, which was phenomenal. And part of that was to give members of the agency, both uniform and civilian, a voice in being able to make recommendations about issues they were concerned about, things that they thought the agency might or should consider doing. And there were roughly 1,300 recommendations that came out of that process. The process was managed by people in the middle part of the agency, not the seniors, right, and not the very bottom, but and they worked in teams, and they managed that process. And ultimately, we implemented about 800 of the 1,300 recommendations, and they ran the gamut from issues around equipment to the type of training that people thought was important and maybe they needed more of, to technology, to community engagement, to civilian promotions, and so forth. So very comprehensive overview, but was a great foundation for moving the agency forward. And so with those recommendations in mind, we went ahead and began to have the agency evolve. But within 9 months of my coming back, I was then asked by Commissioner Bratton to consider the position, taking the position as the first deputy, and that was really interesting. I mean, it wasn't something I expected or ever aspired to, but he asked me. He called me in one day and said, "Let's have a conversation." He says, been looking for, been considering people for the position. Someone said I should talk to you and see if you had an interest. And so we're having this conversation. And I said, of course. I've said since then. I've told people when I give talks. I said sometimes if anyone ever asks you if you ever want to be the first dep, you should say yes. And I'm glad I said yes. It was and what was interesting about that conversation was Commissioner Bratton and we'd known each other over the years from my time at Justice when he was a chief elsewhere in the country and very much involved in the major city chiefs and whatnot. So I knew of him and we knew of each other, but we were, not friends or colleagues in that regard. Anyway, he said to me, if you take the job, you'll be an equal partner in running the agency. And that was a pretty...
That's amazing. When you told me that earlier, it was just, it's not something you would expect to hear.
No, not really. I mean, the history of first deps in the NYPD, typically first deps are, the positions as I recall over my time, in my tenure, first deps had personnel, sometimes training, support services, criminal justice bureau, but that was pretty much in labor relations. And then any other responsibilities that the first dep had were basically at the pleasure of the police commissioner, typically. In this case, in addition to all those areas, CJB, the labor relations and support services and personnel bureau. One of the requests when I said I would accept the position was I wanted to keep the training bureau in my portfolio because that's what I was still in the midst of working with on, and didn't want to have that be abandoned. And he said, "Listen, that's a no-brainer." And so training stayed in the bureau. But then he went on to say, "I want you to handle all the discipline," which we added to the portfolio, the department advocate and the trial bureau, because they are, the core of our disciplinary process in the department. And they also have a direct impact on our relationship with communities and how we treat community complaints, particularly around CCRB complaints, for example. But they also have an importance for our internal success as it relates to how we treat the officers who do come through the disciplinary system and providing them, treating them with respect as well and fairness and equity, even as, the disciplinary process goes forward. So it was the trials and DAO, but we also then subsequently added the Risk Management Bureau, which was a new entity that was created in 2014 and initially reported to the Deputy Commissioner for Legal Matters, but also was also the liaison entity that worked with the Federal Monitor that had been appointed by the Federal District Judge in the as a result of the settlement of the 3 lawsuits that were filed around the stop and frisk litigation.
Yeah, I was going to say it was stop and frisk
litigation, right? And so, and of course, on that, Mayor De Blasio, when he was elected, I think correctly, wisely settled those 3 actions, and then then engaged with the Federal Monitor to then implement the recommendations and that the court had ordered that the agency engage in to really retrain officers and to address all of the substantive issues that were raised during the litigation that the advocacy community had sought to have corrected, and the courts agreed. And so we've been engaged in that process since that time. In any case, we in late 2014 into early 2015, we moved that process over to the First Dep's office because it seemed to be the right fit. Risk Management Bureau, in addition to being the monitor, the liaison to the monitor, also handles our performance management requirements for the agency. It is our quality assurance division sits there, so we help keep our agency functioning efficiently and effectively, working with local operations people, particularly precinct commanders and so forth. So all of those things seem to fit really, really well. At the same time, in 2014, we started a review of to look at very closely our use of force policy. And use of force policy in the agency was really kind of diffuse in that it was, deadly physical force or serious physical injury, from physical force to serious physical force to deadly physical force, to non-lethal or less lethal uses of force, pepper spray, tasers, all sat in effect within our patrol guide, set in different sections. So we wanted to have a more coherent policy that was not confusing, that made sense, that we took the opportunity as we were thinking about it to really add more data collection. One of the things that we wanted to know more about is sort of, for example, is we wanted to know how many times our officers, we look at how many times we use force against citizens or during encounters, but we tended not to capture in every instance the use of force used against our officers, right? And sometimes our officers would get injured, not catastrophically, but even minor injuries, but it wasn't being documented or captured necessarily in a coherent way. So we added more data collection in that front, and started to look at the threat, resistance, and injuries of our personnel in that context, what we call the TRI report. And so we moved in a direction of overhauling use of force, rolling out a new document such as this new report, which was a paper report at the time, and we sought to capture much more information about the way in which we use force, but also, more importantly, perhaps, in how we investigate and who investigates and how we investigate allegations of force and use of force, or just how we investigate the actual use of force by our officers in that context. So that we, as we were doing sort of revising the policies, we were also Commissioner Bratton and I had a discussion about the way in which we investigated firearm discharges, and we often had questions even after we had the briefs from the borough-based investigations teams about what took place in that particular instance, in that particular case. In any case, we decided to take a look at whether we could make it more uniform and perhaps centralize the process. And to that end, we took a look at other jurisdictions, but especially we took a look at Los Angeles. You recall Commissioner Bratton had been chief of LA before he came back.
And Boston PD.
And Boston
Transit.
Right, and then New York Transit. Yeah. So many hats that he's worn over the years. And so we took a look at, he said, take a look at, because he went through a process out there where they looked at and evaluated their force practices. So we actually, I chaired a committee with our senior, a number of our senior folks, chief of department, chief of patrol, chief of Commissioner Resnick, who was the heads IAB, and a few others. We took a look at what they were doing in LA. They had a force investigation division, and they were getting good results, and they were capturing more data. So it was consistent with where we wanted to go. We adopted the model and scaled it for NYPD. And we implemented. So we placed we went about it in an interesting way, which is not typical for how you staff new units, new divisions. We actually we assessed that we needed 54 investigators, and then we needed a pretty experienced, and those investigators had to be the most experienced. Right. But we also assessed that we needed really good leadership. And so the great thing that happened was we had around the table some of the best investigators in the department. Commissioner Resnick is known, kind of legendary for his investigative skills, and now is running Internal Affairs Bureau, and others at the table. Bob Boyce, who at the time was chief of detectives, and some other folks. Commissioner O'Neill was in the room for that discussion, who was then chief of department. So a really incredibly talented and experienced group of people. And we decided that once we would hire, what I wanted to do, we wanted to get the right people, the right investigators. So we put it on the streets. We said, basically advertised within the department. If you were interested in coming and joining this new unit, this new division, we had 130 applications for 54 positions from some of the best detectives in the job, and at different ranks.
Right.
Within the detective rank, sergeants, lieutenants, and captains, and we selected the best from those folks, and then we decided that we would centralize the team, and they're based out of the new academy, the old academy on 20th Street, so that they centralized in terms of their location in the city, and then we have Zone 1 and Zone 2, basically, which splits up the city.
So they're using the old academy still?
Yes, we are. The old academy remains in our portfolio. Department still has control of it, and we use it quite a bit. So in addition to it's a candidate assessment center, we centralized all of the candidate review process that was heretofore scattered around the city. So if you were coming on, applying to be a police officer or had some other position that required you to go through these various processes, but mostly, people who were interested in becoming police officers, they'd have to go to Left Rack City, they'd have to go to some other location to file papers, so we tried to make it more user-friendly. If you're a candidate, everything happens here. We brought the doctors to do the assessments at the 20th Street Academy, and the investigations process existed there as well. And so forth. So we tried to sort of make it user-friendly to the community so that we could, we don't want to discourage people who we'd like to have come into the job. We want to make it easy for them to the one-stop shopping seem to make sense. So that happens there as well. And we're still improving, have made improvements on that process even from 2.5 years ago when we first launched it. So Force Investigations Division is now up and running since July of 2015, and we have it's been phenomenal. I mean, it's worked out extraordinarily well. It investigates all firearm discharges, so whether they're accidental, whether they're dogs, whether they're suicides, or deaths in custody. Those situations where we might be pursuing someone and they jump on the train tracks and meet their demise, whatever the situations are. But what a category which we call death in custody, which is a little bit broader, and that group also is the liaison to one of our oversight entities, the Inspector General, State Inspector General, was charged, as you may recall, with by the governor to look at any firearm discharge of an officer or death of an individual who is not armed but shot by the police. So so we work very closely with them. As just one example. The area of firearm discharges is in itself an interesting bit of information, and importantly noted right at the end of this last year, for example, we ended the year with. And many people don't realize this, but people are shocked when I say it. But last year we ended the year with 35 firearm discharges in all. So you think about 36,000 cops, you think about 5 million radio runs, 8.6 million people. About whatever the number is, the total number of our firearm discharges, usually about half of those are adversarials, so the bad guys are shooting at us or using some other deadly form of deadly physical force against our officers, and they respond.
That number is a shocker.
It's a shocker. So we had 17 adversarials, and it's stunning. It's a stunning number. We also have we're firing fewer rounds. We count the number of rounds that are fired, and we fire fewer rounds. But we also shoot a number of dogs. We have accidental discharges. We're cleaning guns and things like that. So the year before that, I think the number was 53. And with about half of those being adversarial. So the numbers have consistently come down over the last 4.5 years. I call it the painted brush syndrome. So when you think about some of the horrible incidents that have happened, not just here in the city where we've had some really serious issues, but you think about what's happened elsewhere around the country, some of these horrible shootings that have taken place that have been on video, we get painted with that same brush, we meaning the NYPD.
Right.
And the reality is that that's not who we are. In fact, it is troubling, and I'm very frustrated by that, because the truth of the matter is, so I gave you the number of 35 and 17 adversarials. When we came on the job around 1972, when I got out of the academy, we had 954 firearm discharges in the city. And so if you use the formula we're currently using, which is, you assume that half of those were adversarials based on what we've been experiencing in over the last several years, that would mean that well over 400 adversarials took place then. So 400 compared to 35 gives you a sense of how much restraint our officers use in making those decisions to use deadly physical force. And that's important. That shouldn't be discounted, because and I think, to your point, Ed, I mean, it's important for the citizens to know that, because our officers exercise great restraint.
Exactly.
And sometimes when we've said that to the press or to the media, they've had the same reaction you have, but it doesn't always make it to the press. So.
Commissioner, with what you just said about what goes on throughout the country, and the NYPD gets painted with the same brush, that's what I'm hoping that this program will accomplish, that we bring officers on, neighborhood coordination officers, precinct commanding officers, and let the public know that we are different. Don't look at us the same way you look at the departments in the rest of the country. It's a shame that we get painted with the same brush all the time.
But it's also, you're right, Joe, but it's also, it really is, what it underscores is, I mean, we've gone out of our way to really focus on recognizing that, that the number of times we fire our weapons, to the extent that we can reduce the use of deadly physical force. And we've done that over the years, through a lot of the research that
Jimmy Fife?
Jimmy Fife did. I mean, Jim Fife, was one of the lieutenants, got his PhD, and then did a lot of he immersed himself in firearm and use of force discharges, and because of him, we started a trend downward with respect to de-escalation and restraint, but also he made it safer for our officers. So our tactics, we struggle all the time to remind our officers to be safe, and one of the ways we keep them safe is by making sure that they have really good training in tactics and understand where to position themselves and how to position themselves, and not to put themselves in harm's way, which gives them more time to make decisions about how to handle whatever the situation is. So that's what's, and so we've gotten here because of that, and we continue to, as I said a little while ago in my earlier remarks, about scenario-based training is designed to do just that, and we are, every chance we get, trying to provide more and more training around improved tactics for our officers, exposure to opportunities to get better training and more training, and we announced some time ago we have a number of, as you know, a number of firearms ranges around about 9 or 10 that really been dormant for years, and we working with our Deputy Commissioner for Management and Budget and his people to remediate the lead in those places, and then bring in sophisticated TI equipment that allow us to do virtual reality training and tactics training in those spaces. So it's not up and running. We piloted it in the 9-0 precinct a few months ago, and now we're just working on how to staff it and how to bring them online.
But that's a step in the right direction.
Another step in the right direction.
Exactly.
With these reduction in numbers that you were speaking about, how much do you think the new community policing philosophy has played a role in this?
Well, it is absolutely central to it. I think, you know, the neighborhood policing approach is sort of the center of now the core of, as you say, the philosophy. The goal is not just to create another program, you know, which we've done a lot of. We've seen over the years, right, Joe, in the department. They never really got traction because for lots of reasons, you know, lack of resources, no commitment to really dedicate that much time to training or whatever it was, but it just didn't happen. What makes this last 4.5 years unique in a number of other ways that I hadn't mentioned yet, which has to do with not just having the right person in Bratton, for example, who was motivated to come back and understood what he wanted to do, but the stars aligned in another way with the mayor, who's been very supportive. But they also align with our ability to have resources. We have resources. So, you know, we gave every one of our police officers a smartphone. We funded that with dollars we received from forfeiture dollars through the Manhattan DA's office. We have enhanced our technology incredibly so. And so the smartphones are just one tool, but in the hands of every one of our officers, they have access to our databases. They have access to information. When a 911 call is placed, the information of that call shows up on the officers' phones, and they can respond. Sometimes they're on the way to the job before they even get the call from the dispatcher sending them to give them the job. So that's really, it's been incredible, right? Then you think about our network of license plate readers, shot spotter technology, the sensors for weapons being fired, and the network of cameras. You know, 20,000 or so, both either our Argus cameras or cameras that are part of our stakeholder cameras that exist on commercial buildings or private buildings. All of that gives us the capacity to be much more effective in detecting shootings and also in responding in a way that's most effective. And so it has changed the way in which policing is done in this city, and we've gotten really good at it. The other thing that's happened is we use all of this technology and our intel, our field intelligence officers, you know, as they gather data. We're taking guns off the street, thousands of guns each year, by debriefing prisoners. Lots of things that we've been able to do, but the reason I lay it out that way is because it gives you a sense of there's a collective sort of effort to that things that they all come together and it all works together as one approach to fighting crime more effectively. If you add to that, you know, the reorganization of the Detective Bureau, and really sort of, we took organized crime and what they do, vice and narcotics and all, and blended that into the bureau now. Reorganization there for management by the chief of detectives, and the CompStat is become much more lean and mean in sort of CompStat 2.0, which is really allowed us to be much more focused and sharing of information between and among the various divisions and units within the department, the detectives, anti-crime, field investigators, you name it, really using resources more effectively and information more effectively, has produced, given us the ability to focus on that small, tiny population of people who are responsible for the most violent crime in the city. And so it's not a dragnet where you just go out and scoop up anyone or groups of people. You focus on those folks who you know. Today I'm the shooter, tomorrow I'm the victim, right? The gang activities and so forth. So All of that is part of it. It's not by accident. It's very intentional. Where we've gotten, I think, much more focused and smarter about how we do what we do, and I would add to that, none of that happens without really people who are incredibly talented, and we've got
absolutely.
But our investigators, the senior executive team in this department is extraordinary, both on the civilian side and the uniform side, and so add to that our ability to really coordinate on outreach to citizens. We now have victim assistance advocates in every one of our precincts. When it comes to building bridges, this is what this is all about. If you're looking at opioid, you all know how seriously, certainly here in Staten Island, is you felt it's been devastating.
Absolute nightmare in Staten Island.
Right? And so we have RX stat, roughly 30 agencies get together on a regular basis to share information such as they can, and respectful of the confidentialities that the various entities that are participating, but all focused on how do we use this data that we collect to understand the problem of opioid.
Would you say that the interagency communication over the past 4.5, 5 years has improved greatly?
It's absolutely true. I mean, it is one of the things, and it has improved unbelievably so. And if you were to sit in on a CompStat, we always have guests that come in, and these are guests from other agencies, but often our partners, DA's office or others coming in from the state or whoever, foreign nationals, people who we work with and coordinate with around the globe. So lots of that communication, but our communication with between and among city agencies is allowed us to be much more effective, and it also kind of echoes and I think underscores the importance of the fact that police are the first responders, but we can't do it by ourselves, and so the notion that policing is a shared responsibility really means that we can't do it without the community, without the neighborhood, the people in the neighborhoods. And that's just a fact. It has been forever. But sometimes it hasn't been done that way. It hasn't been part of the intentional, the purposeful approach to doing what we do. Those walls, those silos, to the extent that they existed, are pretty much dissipated with respect to how we engage community. But they've also dissipated, certainly, with respect to how we communicate with our other entities, our partners, our stakeholder, law enforcement partners, as well as our social services partners, and across the board. So when you have that kind of deliberate communication, with a particular focus in mind of understanding what the problem is, how to solve the problem, and what it's going to take to do that, whether it's the use of Narcan to help reverse overdoses, but also to then have a team respond to that location to speak to that person once they are revived and they're to try and get them into some services. Those kinds of things. That's just one example of the kinds of things that we try to do. Ceasefire, which Commissioner Herman has been very much in the forefront of, in addition to the giving voice to our victim advocates to help them, get the services they need, but also help them be advocates on their own behalf to be part of how we make cases, prosecute bad guys, and so forth. So there's a lot of sort of these different lanes that are simultaneously taken.
We have to take away the adversarial position between community and police on both sides of the fence.
Yeah. I mean, and that's all about understanding. I mean,
exactly.
That's really, we don't make it if we don't work together.
Exactly.
I mean, this is simple. This is
one of the things I find today. Police officers have more information at their disposal than when you and I were out on patrol. And I think I attribute that to community policing. A lot of these officers, the NCOs especially, they're really involved with finding as much information as possible on any assignment they go on. Plus, they're involved in a CompStat out here on Staten Island, the NCOs. I don't know if they do that throughout the city, but they have a CompStat that they have to go through, and it's amazing. I was at a Build-A-Block meeting, the first Build-A-Block meeting that Sector Boy held in the 121. I was amazed that virtually every question that was asked by the participants, the people sitting in the audience, virtually every question was answered. They had the answers, and it wasn't just the NCOs, it was also the other officers on patrol that were present there, and I was like sitting there in awe. I said, I can't believe this.
Yeah.
Well, they had answers to everything. Well, and I think I told you earlier, the NCOs that I'm assigned to, I'm a community partner in the 121. I'm like a fly on the wall in the neighborhood. If I hear anything, I got to call them and let them know. They already know. They already know. I said, I'm wasting my calls here. I said, why do I bother calling you guys, It's unbelievable.
Because they're doing their job.
They're doing their job. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it's all about. I mean, you don't, if you're plugged in and you're engaged in the neighborhood, right? I mean, this is grassroots kind of stuff, right? I mean, that's the whole idea. When Commissioner, the notion of neighborhood policing was an idea that that Commissioner O'Neill had,
right?
And when I don't remember the day it was, but I remember the conversation that we had talking about his idea and what he was wanting to do with the whole resectoring idea and dedicating officers to sectors. For me, for a guy who's been involved in community-oriented policing and was part of the cops office when I worked at Justice, I mean, we were providing all the funding, and that funding, if you remember the 1994 crime bill, they created the cops office at that moment, along with a number of other entities that were part of the Justice Department, Violence Against Women's Office and a whole host of others. But President Clinton was serious about it. The Attorney General at the time, Janet Reno, was serious about it. She believed in it, and we worked basically for the Attorney General doing this work and providing the funding. Lots of money at that time, $8.8 billion that was budgeted through Congress to hire 100,000 new officers around throughout the nation. The local police departments make money available to them for that. And basically pay 3/4 of, if they hired an officer, the program would pay 3/4 of their salary for the first 3 years, and then they would have to keep the officers on board and so forth. So that was the idea, was to sort of push that down, but it was also not to really dictate how community policing. We had a framework, but it recognized that what a chief needs to do in a tiny town in Tennessee is different from what someone may want to do in Boston, right? But the idea is to allow police leaders to imagine what they might need and how they might best implement this idea of community engagement between their officers and themselves. And the community, rather, in a way that would get the most value. And that hasn't changed till today. So when Commissioner O'Neill talked about neighborhood policing in that context, I was a fan already and he was willing not only just to say he wanted to do this, but he had a plan for I mean, it's a big deal. And we've done a lot that's been unprecedented over the last 4.5 years.
Right.
But one of those things is unprecedented, is the notion of really restructuring the patrol function. It's something that hadn't happened ever before, as far as we can tell, in any dramatic way. Not in this context, not in the way that it's happened here, and the neighborhood coordination officers concept, but also and that was all part of the recognition that we knew, and we know still that we have to have a better relationship with all of the communities that we serve, and the only way you can do that is if we are able to build trust, if we're able to sort of get the community to trust that what we're trying to do is the right thing on their behalf, and I think we're doing that. And we're going to be evaluating the program. We'll be doing that. We have an evaluator on board, and we're starting to talk with them and just what this will look like. But I can tell you that anecdotally, I travel around the city a lot. I'm out all the time. So is Commissioner O'Neill. So is many of our senior execs. Certainly our precinct commanders. When you talk about support services and the work that we've done to really improve, again, this is internal to the department, and through the building maintenance grew out of the deputy commissioner for budget management budget. These things, support services and our fleet services people in particular. When you're talking about making sure that we have the vehicles, that our officers have the vehicles they need, and we have the biggest fleet in the nation, over 9,000 right. vehicles, and but we have to maintain them. I mean, it's a robust, unbelievable operation that the Deputy Commissioner Bob Martinez is oversees. He's got property clerk. He's got records, Central Records Division, and he's got fleet services. I mean, we've retrofitted the cars with door panels, so that our officers have some additional safety.
Right.
We have the glass that's there, the bullet-resistant glass. So, we looked at those things carefully after we had some of the tragic shootings, and basically after Lou and Ramos were murdered.
Right.
We started to look at those things, and we didn't just talk about it. I mean, we talked about it. We thought, what do we have out there that we might want to adopt? Bob went out and looked, and he came back with prototypes, and we implemented it. Those kinds of things are, people don't know about, but they enhance the ability of our officers to do their jobs in a safer way, which is a benefit to the community, right? In many ways, and just in that context. The days fly by, the months fly by, and before you know it, I mean, I've been back now since 2014. It's like, here it is, 2019. So 5 years, exactly, and next month, will be 5 years. That I've been back at the agency, and it's the best move I ever made. I talked to you for another 3 hours about all the things that have happened in the last 4.5 years that have added value incrementally to the effectiveness of, and the results are shown through reduced crime, lowest it's ever been since we've been keeping statistics. But not just that, but in many ways. Also, in the fact that the community engagement is getting traction in ways that it's never gotten before, and a lot of that has to do with, again, circling back to training. Training has been critical in every respect to everything that we've accomplished. Training historically, and you know this, Ed, and so you, Joe. Sometimes training in police departments is not the priority. It's everything else, and when resources are not there or dwindling, then training takes a back seat to operations, which, what else would you do? I mean, that kind of makes sense. Yeah. But we now have, I think we're way beyond that, where we are training pretty much. We added three additional training in-service training days, so that's going to happen. So every officer gets 5 days of training. But the reality is that we've trained officers of late in so many different subject areas in the last few years that we're really up about 12 days a year. 12 training days is what we've invested in.
But that's important.
It's very important, and it is critically important to the success of and sustaining our neighborhood policing platform.
Did you add a few more days of training at the academy?
Well, most of it happens there. I mean, it is. So we have, we get 2 days firearms training, right? But then we added 3 days, one of which will always be tactics, because tactics is a perishable skill. We recognize that after the Garner case,
right?
And so then we added the other 2 days. We use them for other types of training that will be different over time, but most recently have been used for the stop and frisk training that we've had to conduct as a result of the federal monitorship in various ways. The use of body-worn cameras, the introduction of body-worn cameras, that also was related to the federal order that we do a pilot. But then we, recognizing the efficacy of using body-worn cameras and to support and to be more transparent, our officers and to give them the ability to document some of the transactions and encounters that take place. And that's been to, I think, our benefit. So we are rolling out, by the end of this, right now we have about 20,000 officers wearing body-worn cameras. The pilot, the federal pilot notwithstanding, which is over, and they're still just crunching the data to see what they've learned from that particular evaluation. But we believe that that no matter what that says and what we learn, doesn't diminish the fact that the value of having our officers wearing cameras and increasing the number of those cameras is a very good thing. And, I talk about it because I'm excited about it, but I also want our city and our communities to be equally excited about it because it is a big deal.
And please extend to Commissioner O'Neill an invitation to come here. And we have a parting gift for you, Patrick. This is one of the NCOs in the 121 precinct that I'm assigned to.
See, my office is going to love you.
Italian cheesecake. And his partner, Brian, they are a wealth of knowledge, and they do their job. They work very, very hard, and I'm so happy to be associated with them.
But have you ever asked him how he feels about his job?
Oh, they love it.
Yeah, but that's what I mean.
No,
That's
love
why,
it.
Joe. I mean, that's because that's the key, right?
Those are low calorie, right?
Low calorie, yeah.
And,
My wife will appreciate that.
I think you met Patrick before. He's
I have.
neighborhood coordination officer.
Real pleasure.
And this is his fill-in partner
Yes,
today,
indeed.
Officer Nickel. Brian, his
pleasure.
regular partner, is out having some training. But
I'm hoping that they are excited as I am about what I do every day, and I think they are. I love it.
they love it.
I mean,
They do.
it's a new day, and the sky's the limit, and the communities are really responding well. I mean, yeah, is everybody happy? No, but most people, I think, and a lot of people are this is resonating with them. The fact that they have access to officers, that they have a cell phone number, that they have someone they can call and get information about whatever it is extraordinary. You can tell, and people tell me how it feels out in the communities. They feel safe. They say things like, "I feel safe." I don't mind. They walk around Manhattan. They walk around Brooklyn. They walk around in places.
We were talking about that earlier,
right? And you see it, and people. And the only people who really appreciate how really different things really are in the city are the people who remember what it was like.
Exactly.
And,
Absolutely.
And I grew up in Bed-Stuy on Putnam Avenue, and I have to tell you, it's a whole different ballgame. We have French restaurants on Lewis Avenue in the 7-9. That's a big deal. If you don't know Brooklyn and know Bed-Stuy, you wouldn't necessarily understand the impact of what that is.
You're absolutely right.
I worked the old 8-0. I was down Washington Avenue. I can't believe it.
You can't believe it, right? Same thing. Cafes, your coffee shops.
Thank you for being with us, for accepting our invitation.
No, thank you.
And
This was.
and this is just the
We'd love to have
beginning
you
of
back.
something.
Guys, thank you.
Of something.
You guys are what's left of my future.
Here we go.
You're going to watch it.
This is just the beginning of something good. We're going to be inviting NCOs, as I told you. We're going to be discussing issues in the community.
Yeah.
So once again, thank you.
Joe, thanks a lot.
Good luck to you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you again, Commissioner.
Thanks again, Ed.